James Parker had always dreamed of living in a peaceful neighborhood, the kind where children could ride their bikes safely, where neighbors smiled and waved, and where the evenings carried the sound of birds and laughter instead of traffic noise. After years of working long hours at his office job, he finally saved enough to purchase a modest but beautiful home in a suburban community. The first day he moved in, James felt like everything he had worked for was worth it. He stood in his driveway, boxes still scattered inside the garage, and looked proudly at the small house. It wasn't fancy, but it was his. The grass was green, the paint fresh, and the quiet streets gave him a sense of safety he had longed for. But within only a few days, James realized that peace was going to be harder to hold on to than he expected. Across the street lived Linda Harper. She was a woman in her late 50s, always dressed in pressed blouses and wide sun hats, who seemed to have a pair of watchful eyes on every corner of the neighborhood. The neighbors quietly referred to her as the HOA Karen, though never in front of her. She wasn't an official leader of the Homeowners Association, but she acted like it. To her, every detail mattered. Whether the trash bins were brought in on time, whether the lawns were trimmed exactly to her standards, or whether cars were parked correctly. James didn't notice her at first. He was too busy unpacking and adjusting to his new life. But Linda noticed him. One cool evening, James parked his silver sedan in his driveway after a long day of shopping. He carried groceries inside, humming a tune. As he stepped out again to grab another bag, he saw her approaching. Her footsteps were sharp against the pavement, and her arms were crossed like a soldier marching into battle. "Excuse me," Linda said, her voice tight. James straightened and gave her a polite smile. "Good evening. Can I help you?" "You can't park your car in the driveway overnight," she said flatly. "It ruins the appearance of the neighborhood. We like to keep things looking neat." James blinked, confused. "I'm sorry? This is my driveway. I'm not blocking the street." Linda's eyes narrowed. "The HOA rules are clear. Cars should be kept in the garage overnight. Driveways are for temporary use. You're new here, so maybe you didn't know. I'll let this one slide." James gave a small laugh, trying to ease the tension. "I understand, but my garage is full of boxes right now. I just moved in. I'll need some time to get things organized." "That's not my problem," Linda snapped. "Rules are rules. If I see it again, I'll have to report you." Her words were sharp, but her expression was sharper. She stared at him for a long moment, as though testing whether he would challenge her. James chose patience. "Well, thank you for letting me know," he said calmly. "I'll try to clear the garage as soon as I can." Linda gave a stiff nod and walked back across the street. James sighed, shaking his head. It was a small incident, but it left him unsettled. He had expected friendly introductions from neighbors, maybe a welcome gesture. Instead, his first interaction was a warning. The next morning, James awoke early and peeked out the window. Sure enough, Linda was already outside, watering her flowers. Her eyes darted across the street toward his home. James quickly realized she was watching him. It wasn't just casual glances. She stood there longer than necessary, almost as if making notes in her mind. Over the following days, James began to notice more of her behavior. If a neighbor left their trash bins out past noon, Linda was at their door. If children played too loudly on the sidewalk, she scolded them until they went home. Even the mailman seemed to avoid her gaze. She ruled the neighborhood not with kindness, but with constant correction. James tried to stay positive. He greeted her politely when their paths crossed, even though she rarely smiled back. But something about her constant watchfulness made him uneasy. One Saturday afternoon, James decided to wash his car. He rolled up his sleeves, filled a bucket with soapy water, and hummed while scrubbing the hood. For a moment, he felt relaxed. The sun was warm, and the simple task gave him peace. That was, until Linda appeared again. "You shouldn't be doing that here," she said from the edge of his driveway. James looked up, water dripping from the sponge in his hand. "Doing what?" "Washing your car. The water runs down the driveway and onto the street. It leaves streaks and makes the road look dirty." James frowned. "I'm just washing my car. Everyone does it." "Not in this neighborhood," Linda replied. "We keep things tidy. If you must, take it to a car wash like the rest of us." James inhaled slowly, reminding himself to stay calm. "I appreciate your concern, but I think it's fine. I'll clean up afterward." Linda pursed her lips, clearly displeased. "Suit yourself. But don't say I didn't warn you." She walked off again, leaving James frustrated. He finished washing the car, but the joy was gone. Later that evening, James called his sister Anna to vent. "You wouldn't believe it," he told her over the phone. "There's this woman across the street, Linda. She complains about everything. Parking, washing cars, even how long the trash bin sits outside." Anna chuckled. "Sounds like you've got yourself a neighborhood watchdog." "More like a warden," James muttered. "I don't want trouble, but it feels like she's always waiting for me to make a mistake." "Just ignore her," Anna advised. "Keep living your life. If she crosses a line, deal with it then. Don't let her ruin your peace." James nodded, though he wasn't sure it would be that simple. The next few weeks confirmed his worries. Every time he parked in the driveway, Linda's curtains twitched. If his lawn grew a little too long before mowing, she left a note in his mailbox reminding him of community standards. When he painted his mailbox a shade darker than the original, she left another note, this time demanding he repaint it to match the others. James started to feel trapped in his own home. Instead of enjoying his evenings, he found himself double-checking everything, making sure nothing gave Linda a reason to complain. But no matter how careful he was, she always found something. The tension grew heavier when James finally decided to leave his car in the driveway overnight again. He had worked late and was too tired to clear space in the garage. The next morning, he discovered a bright yellow notice taped to his door. Violation of HOA parking rules. Remove vehicle from driveway overnight. Failure to comply will result in penalties. James clenched the paper in his hands. This time it wasn't just Linda's words. She had officially reported him. He took a deep breath and decided it was time to stop avoiding the issue. He would attend the next HOA meeting and bring up the problem directly. But little did James know, the driveway dispute was only the beginning. Linda was about to take her obsession to a shocking level, one that would not only test James's patience but also change the neighborhood forever. James walked into the HOA meeting with a folder in his hands and a firm resolve in his heart. He had lived in the neighborhood for less than 3 months, but the constant complaints from Linda Harper were becoming unbearable. He wanted peace, not conflict, but every day it seemed Linda was pushing him closer to a breaking point. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a modest building with rows of folding chairs and a long table at the front, where the HOA board members sat. The room was filled with residents, many chatting quietly before the meeting began. James noticed some familiar faces, neighbors he had waved to in passing, but none he really knew well yet. At the far side of the room, Linda sat in the second row, her back straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. When she spotted James entering, her lips curved into the faintest smile, as if she had been expecting him. James sat near the middle and waited patiently as the board went through the usual business, maintenance updates, budget discussions, and upcoming community events. Then as the floor opened for concerns, James raised his hand. "Yes, Mr. Parker?" said Mr. Dalton, the HOA president, an older man with glasses and a calm voice. James stood. "I just moved into the neighborhood recently, and I want to bring up something that's been troubling me. I've received complaints about parking in my own driveway and other small things like washing my car or leaving my trash bins out a little late. I'm wondering if these are actual rules written in the HOA agreement or just personal opinions." The room grew quiet. A few neighbors shifted in their seats, curious. Linda immediately raised her hand. "They are rules," she said firmly before the board could respond. "We've always kept this neighborhood neat, and driveways are not meant for overnight parking. It lowers property values." James turned toward her. "With respect, I've looked through the HOA documents. Nowhere does it say I can't park in my driveway. It says we should avoid blocking the street or leaving cars on the grass, but nothing about driveways." A murmur swept through the room. Some nodded in agreement. Mr. Dalton cleared his throat. "Mr. Parker is correct. The HOA does not forbid parking in your own driveway. We do encourage use of garages when possible, but it is not a violation." James felt a small wave of relief, but Linda's face tightened. "And what about washing cars?" she pressed. "Or painting mailboxes without approval? These are also against community standards." Mr. Dalton sighed. "Mrs. Harper, not every small action requires board approval. As long as Mr. Parker maintains his property responsibly, he is not in violation." James could feel the shift in the room. A few neighbors glanced at Linda with tired expressions. Clearly, he wasn't the only one who had dealt with her constant complaints. When the meeting ended, James walked out with a sense of victory. He hadn't raised his voice or been rude, but he had stood up for himself. For the first time since moving in, he felt like he had a voice. But Linda did not take defeat lightly. The following week, the tension only grew. Every morning when James stepped outside, Linda was there, watering her plants, sweeping her porch, or simply standing with her arms crossed, watching him. He tried to ignore it, but her eyes followed his every move. One afternoon, James returned home to find a note taped to his door. If you insist on breaking the rules, don't be surprised when consequences arrive. James read the note twice, his jaw tightening. It wasn't official, just a message from her, but it carried a clear warning. He placed it in his folder with the HOA documents, telling himself it might be important later. That night, as he sat on his porch, his neighbor from next door, Mr. Ruiz, walked over. He was a kind man in his 40s with a warm smile. "You're handling it well," Mr. Ruiz said, nodding toward Linda's house. "Most new folks struggle when she starts her watch." James raised an eyebrow. "So it's not just me?" Mr. Ruiz chuckled. "Not at all. She's been like this for years. Complaining about lawns, barking dogs, you name it. She thinks she runs the place. The truth is, most of us just ignore her." James sighed. "I'm trying, but it feels like she's making it personal." Mr. Ruiz lowered his voice. "She probably is. Don't let her push you too far. Just keep everything documented. If she ever goes too far, the HOA board will step in." James nodded, grateful for the advice. But things didn't stop there. One Friday evening, James invited his sister Anna over for dinner. As they sat in the living room eating pizza and laughing about old memories, James suddenly heard a noise outside. A metallic clinking sound. He stood and peeked through the blinds. Linda was standing near his driveway, bending over, doing something suspicious. "What on earth is she doing now?" Anna asked, joining him at the window. James stepped outside quickly. "Linda, what are you doing?" She straightened, holding something in her hand, a small strip of metal. She looked startled for a second, then adjusted her tone. "Oh, I was just checking for cracks in the pavement." It looked uneven. James frowned. "That's not your responsibility. This is my property," Linda huffed. "If you don't maintain it, it affects the whole neighborhood." "I was just being proactive," Anna whispered to James. She was definitely doing something shady. James didn't reply. He simply watched Linda walk back across the street, her expression unreadable. The next morning, James walked out to get the mail. As he stepped onto his driveway, he froze. Something shiny glinted in the sunlight near the entrance. He bent down. His heart skipped a beat. It was a strip of nails carefully laid across the concrete, spike strips. James carefully picked them up, his hands trembling with both shock and anger. If he hadn't noticed, his car tires would have been ruined. Worse, if a child had run across the driveway barefoot, it could have been dangerous. Anna, who had stayed the night, came outside when she heard his footsteps stop. "James, what is that?" "Spike strips," James said quietly. "Someone put them here on purpose." Anna's eyes widened. "You think it was her?" James didn't answer right away. He looked across the street. Linda was standing on her porch, watering her plants as if nothing had happened. But her eyes flicked toward him just for a second, and James felt certain. This wasn't just about parking anymore. This was war. That day, James called the HOA president. He explained what had happened, careful to keep his voice calm even though his heart was racing. Mr. Dalton listened carefully. "Spike strips? That's serious," Mr. Dalton said. "Do you have them with you?" "Yes," James replied. "I took them inside. I didn't want anyone else to get hurt. Keep them safe," Mr. Dalton instructed. "I'll bring this up with the board immediately." "And James, if you feel unsafe, you might want to inform the authorities too." James hung up, his mind racing. He had wanted peace. He had wanted a quiet life. But Linda's actions were becoming dangerous. As night fell, James sat at his desk, staring at the spike strips lying in a plastic bag on the table. His sister's words echoed in his mind. She won't stop until someone stops her. James knew part one of his new life had been about adjusting, but part two was different. Now the battle for peace had begun, and he had no choice but to fight it, carefully, wisely, and without losing his calm. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of Linda's downfall. James woke up the next morning with a heavy feeling in his chest. The spike strips from the day before still lay in a plastic bag on his kitchen counter. Every time he looked at them, he felt a mix of disbelief and anger. He had moved into this neighborhood for peace, yet here he was, living across from someone who would go as far as placing dangerous objects on his driveway. He made coffee, sat at the small table by the window, and watched the street outside. Linda was there again, trimming her roses with neat, sharp movements. She looked calm, as if nothing unusual had happened. But James couldn't shake the memory of her startled face when he caught her crouched near his driveway. Anna came downstairs, still in her pajamas, and poured herself a cup of coffee. "Any news from the HOA?" she asked. James shook his head. "Not yet. I talked to Mr. Dalton, but I think they need time to discuss it. He suggested I inform the authorities." Anna nodded. "You should. What if she does it again? What if someone else gets hurt?" James sighed. "I know. I just hate the idea of turning this into a police matter. I don't want to look like I'm causing trouble." "You're not causing trouble," Anna reminded him firmly. "You're protecting yourself. There's a difference." Her words stayed with him. That afternoon, James decided to visit a local police station. He carried the bag with the spike strips carefully sealed. The officer at the front desk listened patiently as James explained what had happened. "So you found these on your driveway?" the officer asked, holding the bag up. "Yes," James confirmed. "If I hadn't noticed, my car tires would have been destroyed. Or worse, a child could have stepped on them." The officer nodded seriously. "This is considered tampering with private property and could be dangerous. Do you have any idea who might have placed them there?" James hesitated, then said, "I don't have proof, but I strongly suspect my neighbor across the street. She's been confronting me ever since I moved in. Complaints, notes, even standing on my property without permission." The officer wrote everything down. "We'll open a file and keep this as evidence. If you notice anything else suspicious, or if you can get footage like from a security camera, that would strengthen the case." James thanked him and left. As he drove home, he felt lighter. He wasn't powerless anymore. There was now an official record, something Linda couldn't just dismiss. That evening, James went online and ordered a set of security cameras. He had never thought he would need them in such a quiet neighborhood, but the situation left him no choice. By the weekend, he installed them, small, discrete cameras positioned to cover the driveway, front porch, and side yard. Anna helped him test them. "Perfect angle," she said as she checked the live feed on his phone. "If she tries anything again, you'll have it on video." James nodded, feeling a sense of control returning. For a few days, nothing happened. Linda seemed unusually quiet. She still watched from her porch, still carried her clipboard around the neighborhood, but she didn't confront James directly. He wondered if maybe the HOA president had spoken to her, or if she realized she had gone too far. But James's hope didn't last long. One Wednesday morning, James left for work earlier than usual. As he walked toward his car, he noticed something strange, a thin line of powder sprinkled across the edge of his driveway. He bent down and touched it. It wasn't chalk or flour, it was crushed glass. Tiny shards glittered in the sunlight. His heart sank. He carefully brushed it aside with a broom, making sure none of it spread onto the street. When he checked the security footage later that night, his stomach turned. At around midnight, the camera showed Linda walking across the street, carrying a small bag. She bent down at the edge of his driveway and sprinkled something before quickly walking back. The timestamp was clear. The footage was undeniable. James saved the video immediately and backed it up on a flash drive. Anna, sitting beside him, gasped when she saw it. "She's out of control, James. This isn't just petty complaints anymore. This is dangerous." James clenched his fists. "She wanted me to run over that glass. Or worse, for someone else to step on it. This can't continue." The next day, James went back to the police station. He handed the officer the flash drive. "This is the proof you asked for," James said. "The camera caught her putting crushed glass on my driveway." The officer watched the footage carefully, his face serious. "This is very concerning. With the spike strips and now this, it shows a pattern. We'll add this to the case. You did the right thing by installing cameras." James felt both relieved and unsettled. Relieved because now there was solid evidence. Unsettled because his fears about Linda had been right all along. Meanwhile, in the neighborhood, whispers began to spread. People had noticed the tension between James and Linda. Some had seen Linda's frequent trips to his driveway at odd hours. Others had heard the sharp words she often threw at him. Slowly, sympathy began to shift toward James. One evening, as James was watering his lawn, Mrs. Harris from down the street approached. She was an older woman with kind eyes. "I heard about what's been going on," she said softly. "Linda has always been particular, but I didn't realize it had gone this far. If you need someone to speak at the HOA meeting in your defense, I'll be there." James thanked her warmly. "That means a lot. I just want peace, not conflict." She patted his arm. "Peace will come. Sometimes people like her dig their own hole." Her words gave James comfort. The following week, the HOA held another meeting. This time, James brought his folder of documents, the threatening note from Linda, and a copy of the video. He didn't plan to show the footage yet, but he wanted to be prepared. The meeting began as usual, but it didn't take long for Linda to raise her hand. "I have a concern," she announced, standing proudly. "Our new neighbor, Mr. Parker, continues to ignore community standards. He leaves his car out, his lawn is sometimes uneven, and I've observed questionable activity at night." James took a deep breath and stood up. "With respect, I think it's time the board knows the full story. Since moving in, I've been harassed, not welcomed. Complaints, notes, and even dangerous items left on my driveway." Gasps filled the room. Linda scoffed. "That's ridiculous. He's just trying to blame me because he doesn't want to follow the rules." But James calmly pulled out the photo of the spike strips. "This was on my driveway." He held it up for everyone to see. "I reported it to the police." Murmurs spread across the room. "And this," James continued, pulling out the printed image from his security footage, "is from my camera. It shows someone pouring crushed glass on my property at midnight. That someone is Mrs. Harper." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Linda. Her face went pale, but she quickly tried to recover. "This is an invasion of privacy. He's spying on me?" Mr. Dalton, the HOA president, leaned forward, his voice firm. "Mrs. Harper, this is not about privacy. This is about safety. If what Mr. Parker says is true, you have crossed a serious line." Neighbors whispered to each other, some shaking their heads, others glaring at Linda. For the first time, she didn't look confident. James sat back down, his heart pounding. He hadn't wanted to humiliate her, but he knew it was necessary. He had to protect himself. That night, James sat on his porch looking up at the quiet stars. For the first time in weeks, he felt supported. He wasn't alone anymore. But deep inside, he knew the story wasn't over yet. Linda wasn't the type to back down easily. And while the evidence was against her, he could sense she was already planning her next move. Little did James know, the walls were closing in on Linda. Her actions had gone too far, and soon it wouldn't just be the HOA confronting her. It would be the law. The days after the HOA meeting felt different in the neighborhood. For the first time, James noticed neighbors giving him small nods of encouragement, little gestures that told him they had seen and heard enough to understand the truth. Linda Harper, once feared for her strict watchfulness, now walked with tighter shoulders and a stiffer smile. But Linda wasn't the type to surrender. James sensed it. Every time he glanced across the street, he saw her curtains move. Sometimes she stood on her porch pretending to water her flowers. But her eyes were always fixed on his house. She wasn't done with him. Not yet. Anna, who had been visiting more often to support him, warned him one evening as they sat on the porch. "She's embarrassed, James. People like her don't forgive easily. She'll try something again." James nodded slowly. "That's what I'm afraid of. But this time I'm ready. The cameras are recording and the police already have her on file." Anna placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "Good, just keep calm. She's digging her own hole." A week later, James returned home late from work. The street was quiet, the kind of silence that normally brought comfort, but that night it made him uneasy. He parked his car in the driveway and gathered his briefcase from the passenger seat. As he stepped out, he heard the faint sound of movement. He turned quickly, scanning the shadows. For a moment, nothing. Then he saw it. Linda standing near the corner of her yard, half hidden by a tree. She wasn't holding tools this time. She was simply standing there, watching him. James felt a chill run down his back. He didn't speak to her. He didn't even acknowledge her. Instead, he walked calmly into his house, locking the door behind him. Later, when he checked the security footage, there she was, standing in the dark, watching his driveway for nearly 20 minutes before finally returning to her house. James saved the clip. Another piece of evidence. The following Saturday, James invited a few neighbors over for coffee. He wanted to build connections and show that he wasn't just a victim in this story, but also someone who wanted to belong to the community. Mrs. Harris came, as well as Mr. Ruiz and a younger couple from down the street, Mark and Emily. They sat in his living room sipping coffee and sharing small laughs. For the first time, James felt like he had allies. "I've lived here for 12 years, Mrs. Harris said gently. "Linda has always been difficult, but I've never seen her go this far." "You've handled it better than most would." Mr. Ruiz nodded. "The video you showed at the meeting? That opened people's eyes. We've all experienced her temper, but now it's clear she crossed the line." James smiled faintly. "I just want peace. That's all I ever wanted." Emily leaned forward. "You'll get it. The more people see the truth, the less power she has." Their support warmed James's heart. For the first time since moving in, he didn't feel so alone. But while he shared laughter with his new friends, Linda sat across the street, peering through her window. The sight of James enjoying the company of others twisted her stomach with anger. In her mind, he wasn't a victim. He was the problem, the one who had turned the neighborhood against her. She couldn't allow it. The next morning, James discovered a new note in his mailbox. This one wasn't signed, but he didn't need a signature to know who it was from. "You don't belong here. Leave before things get worse." James read it calmly, though his hands tightened around the paper. He placed it in his folder with the other notes. This time he didn't feel fear. He felt determination. He immediately called the police station and informed the officer about the new note. The officer assured him that it would be added to the file and that they were keeping a close watch on the situation. A few nights later, James's security cameras captured something shocking. Around 2 a.m., Linda was on his property again. This time she wasn't leaving objects. She was spraying something along the edge of his lawn, a harsh chemical that left brown streaks where the grass had once been green. The next morning, James stepped outside and saw the damage. His once bright lawn now had patches of dead yellow grass. He didn't even need to guess who had done it. When he checked the footage, his suspicion was confirmed. The video clearly showed Linda carrying a spray bottle, crouching low, and applying it directly to his lawn. James's anger boiled, but he reminded himself of Anna's words. "Keep calm. She's digging her own hole." He saved the footage and called the police again. This time the officer's tone was firmer. "Mr. Parker, this is no longer just harassment. This is property damage. We are preparing to move forward with stronger action. Continue documenting everything." By now the entire neighborhood was buzzing. People whispered on sidewalks, glanced out windows, and shook their heads when they saw Linda pacing her yard. The respect she once commanded had turned into distrust. One afternoon, Mark from down the street approached James as he was getting his mail. "Hey, I just wanted you to know," Mark said quietly. "If the police ever need witnesses, my wife and I will speak up. We've seen Linda on your driveway late at night. We didn't want to get involved before, but enough is enough." James thanked him sincerely. Support was growing and Linda's control was slipping, but Linda wasn't finished. A few days later, James came home to find his garbage bins knocked over, trash scattered across his yard. At first he thought it might have been an animal, but when he checked the cameras, he saw Linda in her robe, dragging the bins and tipping them over before hurrying back across the street. Anna, watching the footage with him, shook her head. "She's not even trying to hide anymore. It's like she wants to get caught," James agreed. "She's desperate. And the more desperate she gets, the more careless she becomes." He saved the footage again. The folder on his computer now held dozens of clips, each one stronger than the last. The case against her was building like a wall, brick by brick. The HOA board, too, could no longer ignore it. At the next meeting, Mr. Dalton addressed the room with a heavy sigh. "It has come to the board's attention," he said, "that repeated incidents have occurred involving harassment and damage to property. The board does not condone this behavior. We will be cooperating fully with local authorities to ensure the safety of all residents." Linda sat rigid in her chair, her face pale, her lips pressed thin. For the first time, she didn't argue. James simply sat in silence, feeling the weight of the moment. Justice was coming closer. That evening, as James sat on his porch, he looked across the street. Linda stood there, her arms crossed, her eyes burning with silent fury. For years, she had ruled the neighborhood with fear and strictness. But now her power was crumbling. James didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He had the truth on his side, and soon the authorities would act. He leaned back in his chair, listening to the quiet night, and thought about how strange life could be. He had moved to this neighborhood for peace, but instead he had found conflict. Yet in that conflict he had also found something else: strength, allies, and a voice he never realized he had. Linda, meanwhile, was reaching her breaking point. She had lost control of the neighbors, lost her authority in the HOA, and soon she would lose something even more important: her freedom. And though James didn't know the exact moment it would happen, he sensed it was coming. The day Linda would finally face the consequences was drawing near. The tension in the neighborhood had reached its peak. Everyone could feel it, like the heavy air before a storm. For weeks, Linda Harper had been unraveling, her actions growing more reckless, her temper more visible, her control slipping through her fingers. And James Parker knew the end was close. Every night, he checked his cameras. Every morning, he inspected his yard. Each time there was something new: trampled flowers, tipped over bins, or scratches on his mailbox. None of it surprised him anymore. What surprised him was how calm he had become. He no longer reacted with anger or fear. Instead, he documented everything, saved every clip, and placed every piece of evidence into a folder that was now too full to close. The police had assured him they were watching closely. All James needed to do was stay patient, but Linda wasn't patient. One Thursday afternoon, James returned home earlier than usual. As he pulled into his driveway, his heart sank. There, right across the cement where his car usually rested, lay another cruel trap: sharp metal spike strips positioned carefully to destroy his tires. James stopped his car just in time, his breath catching in his chest. He stepped out slowly, staring at the strips. His camera above the garage blinked red, recording everything. From across the street, he saw movement. Linda stood at the edge of her porch, arms crossed, lips curved in the faintest of smirks. She thought she had won again, but James didn't shout. He didn't confront her. He simply pulled out his phone and dialed the police. "Officer," he said calmly, "the spike strips are back. This time they're here right now. And I've got the whole thing on video." Within 20 minutes, 2 police cars arrived, their lights flashing silently. The neighbors peeked through their curtains, some stepping outside to watch. The air buzzed with anticipation. The officers carefully examined the strips, photographed them, and then walked toward Linda's house. James watched from his driveway, his heart steady. Linda met them halfway across her lawn, her voice sharp. "What's the meaning of this? Why are you bothering me?" "Ma'am," one officer said firmly, "we need to speak with you regarding the placement of dangerous objects on your neighbor's property." Linda's face twisted. "That man is lying. He's been against me since the day he moved here. He's trying to ruin me." But the officer remained calm. "Ma'am, we have video evidence. Multiple recordings. And we've received numerous reports from neighbors. Please cooperate with us." For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed Linda's face. She glanced toward James, who stood quietly near his porch, phone still in his hand. Around him, several neighbors had gathered: Mr. Ruiz, Mrs. Harris, Mark, and Emily, all watching, all witnesses. Linda's voice wavered. "This is ridiculous. I'm the HOA president. I've done nothing wrong." The officer's tone grew sharper. "Ma'am, step aside. We need to ask you some questions at the station. Please place your hands behind your back." The words seemed to freeze the air. Gasps rippled through the small crowd. James held his breath as he saw the moment unfold, the moment everyone had been waiting for. Linda Harper, the woman who had ruled the neighborhood with fear and rules, the woman who had tried to drive him out with traps and threats, the woman who had believed she was untouchable, was now standing in front of the police, her face pale, her eyes wide. "No," she shouted suddenly, her voice breaking. "You can't do this. I've given years to this neighborhood. I've kept order. I've protected everyone from troublemakers like him." She pointed a trembling finger at James, but no one stepped in to defend her. Not one neighbor spoke up. Instead, silence stretched across the street, heavy and final. The officer repeated the order. "Hands behind your back," and at last Linda obeyed. Slowly, reluctantly, she turned, placing her wrists behind her. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed in the quiet air, sealing her fate. James stood frozen for a moment, a flood of emotions rushing through him: relief, disbelief, and something close to sadness. Because even though Linda had made his life miserable, even though she had gone out of her way to hurt him, Watching her taken away like that didn't feel like victory. It felt like the end of a long, bitter story. The officers guided Linda toward the patrol car. She struggled slightly, still spitting out words of protest, but her voice had lost its power. The neighbors simply watched, their expressions unreadable. Mrs. Harris whispered softly to James, "It's over now. She won't trouble you anymore." James nodded, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The patrol cars drove away, leaving behind a stunned quiet. Slowly, the neighbors drifted back to their homes, murmuring among themselves. The street felt different, lighter, as though a shadow had finally lifted. James remained on his porch long after everyone else had gone inside. He stared across the street at Linda's empty house, its windows dark, its curtains still. For months, it had been the source of his stress, the center of conflict. Now it stood silent, like a monument to everything that had happened. Anna joined him later, carrying 2 cups of tea. She handed him one and sat beside him. "It's finally done," she said softly. James nodded. "Yeah, but I can't help thinking, how did it get this far? All I wanted was a quiet life." Anna gave a small smile. "Sometimes people can't stand to lose control." Linda thought she owned this place, but she forgot one simple truth. No one is above the rules. James sipped his tea, feeling the warmth spread through him. For the first time in months, he felt truly at peace. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. The HOA board held a special election and chose a new president, Mr. Dalton, who promised fairer and calmer leadership. The spike strips were gone, the threats had stopped, and James's lawn began to heal. His driveway was clear, safe, and quiet once more. Neighbors who had once kept their distance now waved when they passed. Some even stopped by to chat. Slowly, the sense of community returned. James found himself smiling more, enjoying the simple things again, the sound of birds in the morning, the sight of children riding bikes, the peace of sitting on his porch without worry. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in warm colors, James reflected on everything that had happened. He realized something important. Adversity had not broken him. It had revealed his strength. He had faced unfairness, intimidation, and hostility, but he had stood firm, and in the end, truth had prevailed. Linda Harper would be remembered, not as the ruler of the neighborhood, but as the woman who went too far. And James Parker? He would be remembered as the neighbor who endured, who refused to be driven out, who helped the community see clearly again. For James, that was enough. That night, he sat on his porch with Anna, sipping tea under the stars. The air was calm, the street was quiet, and for the first time since moving in, James felt like he truly belonged. The nightmare was over, and the peace he had dreamed of was finally his.